Okay, so we've got 15 or 20 minutes, and what I thought would be quite useful to do is to sort of open up the general discussion now to you guys, and perhaps we can pick up on some of those issues that came out in my presentation. But I think it'd be very interesting to hear what you guys are thinking and to hear your thoughts, and that might give Rob and other leadership people in the college some idea of some of the alternative strategies that they might want to explore a bit further going forward. So does anybody want to kick it off, or would you like me to throw up a couple of thought suggestions to begin with? Who's brave? This gentleman over there looks as if he wants to say something. Well, I'd have a view on that, but I'm not within the college. I mean, I certainly think funding remains a significant issue for the college. Rob has brought out in his opening comment, there's obviously some differences of view in terms of training nationally and how that should go about, how we should go about that. But, you know, you guys are practicing surgical podiatry at the coalface. What are the issues that you see on a day-to-day basis? I was speaking to this gentleman earlier, and he was saying that there's certainly no shortage of patients looking for surgical podiatry, so the demand is there. I don't know whether there is enough podiatrists or orthopedic surgeons to service that demand. But what I do know is that if funding was there, if there was unmet demand, that demand would pretty quickly become met, because funding would be an issue for a lot of people who could probably benefit from surgical podiatry, but aren't prepared to go ahead with it because of finances. Well, I don't think it's an either or. You can easily do both. But I think you should remember that it is very difficult for a day hospital to achieve a contract with a health insurance fund other than in WA under the current structure, because private health insurance funds are not in the habit of giving out money to new services. That's just the reality. They are not in that habit. You've all seen the literature, which shows quite a massive exodus of insured people from the insurance sector forecast for the next 12 months. And remember that health insurance premiums have been, the cost of those have been pushed really quite significantly downwards in the last 2 years because of COVID, and I'm sure the health insurance funds have made some quite tidy profits. But that unmet demand is now quickly having to be caught up, and so private health insurance funds, even if they have made good profits in the past, are unlikely to want to share that money with new services, which they're not currently paying for, especially when there's no MBS recognition of those services. And if I was a health insurance fund CEO, looking at all these competing demands, I don't think podiatric surgery would be my priority. It's small. I'm not paying for it at the moment. And you can get the services done by an orthopod. So it's not easy for a day hospital either. So I don't think, so I think that I certainly think if you got the MBS funding in place, that would make things easier, but it would not necessarily solve the problems. You know, it's taken a long time to achieve where you've got already, okay? So things in this space don't move quickly. But having said that, when you reflect on what happened in the health sector over the last 2 years since COVID, things can change very, very quickly. You just need the right set of dynamics to be in place. Now, I don't know when those dynamics, when all the planets are going to align to make your job easy in terms of advocating. But when that does happen, you guys really need to be ready to move very, very quick and very, very hard. Now, we don't know who the new health minister is going to be tomorrow. That might be an opportunity. Once you change health minister, I don't know whether there'll be a change of government, but even without a change of government, we're going to have a different health minister. So that could be an opportunity that you should be looking at. You should be also looking at where things are being stuck internally. You really need to solve those problems. I don't know how strong the differences are in terms of how training should be done, but it does seem to me that if you could align the training, that would solve some problems as well. And it's all these little gains that gradually can build momentum. Well, I think there's two or three things I could say. The Theatre Banding Committee is not a government committee, okay? The Theatre Banding Committee is made up of representatives of health insurance funds and hospitals. And so it's not regulated by government. And because it's funds on one side and hospitals on the other side, at the end of the day, it's all about money, okay? And that's what the Theatre Banding Committee tries to achieve in terms of taking any item number that deals with surgery, regardless, I think, whether it's doesn't really matter which part of the MBS it comes from. If it's a procedure that's done in hospital, and remember, there are a lot of medical procedures done in hospitals, not only surgical procedures. So if anything that's done in hospital, a theatre band or a day surgery band, which covers the accommodation side, would be allocated to that procedure, and that's what determines funding. But private health insurance funds, their starting point will be, we're not even going to talk to you until you've got an MBS item number that MBS will pay for those procedures. They won't even look at you at the moment. I mean, I'm quite surprised. I don't quite understand the position in WA, but they've come to the party for many, many years. Maybe Rob could tell us a bit about that. And Medibank Private have done a little bit on the hospital funding, but other than that, there's not much movement in terms of the health insurance funds, probably over the last 10 years in terms of podiatric surgery. Does anybody know the reason for the position of HBF in WA? Well, one thing that's going through my mind is maybe, to what extent are you interacting with Day Hospitals Australia in terms of getting them to advocate to hospitals on your behalf, to health funds on your behalf? You haven't. That's because COVID prior to COVID coming around, health funds, especially, in fact, all the major health funds were facing significant financial challenges. This I'm talking about 2 years ago. And those challenges meant that they had to find a way of reducing costs without dropping the level of services that they were providing. And a lot of work was done in terms of, and I'm talking direct with the major health funds, in terms of implementing strategies that were aimed at channeling procedures away from overnight hospitals into day hospitals, because all the economics showed that many billions of dollars could be saved. Now that all kind of fizzled a little bit over the last 2 years because a lot of the hospitals weren't operating, the health funds were making big profits, they didn't put up any premiums or they reduced premiums. But that kind of artificial hump is gone now, and we're now in a situation where health funds are going to be feeling the pressure financially because they're going to, a lot of younger, healthier people are going to be leaving health funds, and that's going to mean that health funds will be comprised with older, sicker people, and that puts up costs, etc. And I would imagine that DHA would probably be very keen to reopen the discussions with health funds in terms of actively working to try and switch members from having certain procedures done in an overnight hospital to having a day hospital. And podiatric surgery, a little bit bit of an outlier, but it certainly would be in that kind of, sort of ball game, because especially based on the research that you've got, where you've got data that shows the procedure is $1,500 cheaper than if it's done by an orthopod. That could be something worth pursuing. But I mean, DHA, I mean, they would be very receptive to that. And you've never had any chats with Jane or anybody like that? Because, I mean, all your surgical, I would imagine 95% of your surgical procedures would be done in a day hospital setting and would only go overnight if things go wrong, I guess. But the routine stuff would all be on a day surgery basis. Yeah. No, well done. Well said. You certainly, you've touched on some really important points there. I mean, I think you shouldn't be, I agree with you, talking about yourselves as allied health providers as opposed to surgical podiatrists. I agree with you entirely there. The only point I was making is that you've got this strange phenomena where AHPRA sees you as a surgical specialty, but MBS sees you as allied health providers. And they're both arms of government, but they're using different language. And when you look at what has happened to dental surgery, that gives me a lot of confidence in terms of what could happen with surgical podiatry. So dental surgery is very much in the same kind of ballpark as podiatric surgery. It's in the MBS, and it's funded. Surgical procedures that are done in day hospitals or even hospitals are funded. So there are some precedents there, certainly, for you. The other important thing to note is that I reckon it was only about 8 years ago that health insurance funds actually started realizing that they were in a competing market and they had to really work hard to attract new members. And I wouldn't know how to measure this, but most health insurance funds today are driven more by the market than they are by funding. So market pressures they really understand and they really listen to. And so anything you can do to tap into that, especially in the marketing arms of health insurance funds, would be really great. And if your message is hitting the marketing departments of large health insurance funds, they will listen to it if it's coming from their members, because they actually spend a hell of a lot of money trying to understand what their members want and what they need. And that wasn't the case 10 years ago. So this is a big switch that has happened in health insurance funds. And some of your ideas in terms of, you know, every patient having some kind of drafted letter that they send off to their health fund and to their local member of parliament. I mean, it won't happen. It won't bring about change quickly, but it will start sort of increasing the pressure. Social media, geez, I wish I knew that. Social media is so difficult to understand and control. You've got to be in it. But how effective it is, it's really difficult to understand. It's not exactly that simple, because there is something in the health insurance regime called reinsurance, and that basically is a risk-sharing protocol that all the health insurance funds are complied to participate in, and it's designed to equalize the risk of the elderly population across all health insurance funds. So those costs, there is a pooling mechanism where those costs are shared amongst all the health insurance funds. But the principle is right, you know, we all know elderly people cost more. But a couple of points. I mean, I think that when you look at what's happened in Australia and comparing it to America, I don't know what the process is to become a podiatric surgeon in America. Okay? But when you look at it here, you've got a very robust training program. So I can't see that will be a massive explosion in the number of orthopedic surgeons quickly. I think it's going to take time. Secondly, the message that I would be taking to health insurance funds is really trying to channel patients away from foot and ankle surgery being done by an orthopedic surgeon in a day hospital to a surgical podiatrist being done in a day hospital. So it's not really additional cost, it's substituting costs and at a lower cost. Now, we all know that, but trying to prove it is going to be the difficulty. Maybe another thing worth thinking about is that health insurance funds really listen to the market at the moment. Trust me, it's been a big switch in the way they operate. And it would be quite interesting to find out to what extent general podiatry is seen as a bit of a hot button for extras products. And if it is a bit of a hot button in terms of people buying extras because they want to have access to a podiatrist, maybe that's something else you could build upon and say, well, why don't you expand podiatry to also cover surgical podiatry? Now, they're going to be under different tables. One might be under extras and one might be under hospital. But the principle is something that you could, what's the point of, if general podiatry is seen as important by your members, well, surely surgical podiatry would be equally important. Well, and you can't actually regulate because of the competition laws. But you could certainly have a recommended schedule. AMA does it, and it gets away with it. So you can certainly have that, but you wouldn't be able to make that compulsory on any particular surgical podiatrist. I think in one of our phone conversations, Rob mentioned that you were thinking of doing something in terms of trying to bring surgical podiatry services out to regional areas. Now, that is something that the Department of Health would be very interested to hear. That's a hot button with the Department of Health, bringing surgeons into the regional areas. Now, I don't know how easy that would be. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Big. Yeah. Yeah. It definitely is I mean, there were, in fact, many states, the health sectors over the last 3 or 4 years, they've had a kind of an outsourcing sort of, public and private, to get rid of backlogs. And you're right that with day hospitals, especially in Victoria, they were shut for many, many months. Day hospitals and non-elective surgery in private hospitals. So there would be quite significant waiting lists, and that's something. I don't know what Victoria, how they have they outsourced that historically. With the public sector, money wasn't there. Mm. Okay. I get rid of them. But I mean, it's still an opportunity, even with all those potential problems. I mean, if you can be nimble, and if a group of podiatric surgeons, say in Victoria or Adelaide, Sydney, or wherever, if you could identify one or two day hospitals that had capacity, and if you were able to work with them and say, well, let's put together something to try and get some of this public work into the day hospital setting. I mean, that ticks. If you could achieve that, that starts breaking down, no podiatric surgeons in the yeah. And then yeah. What's happened? Why the patient's not? Yeah, I know, and it's government, and a lot of it is yeah. Okay. Probably the PHNs are kind of probably gatekeepers, yeah. And this is the trouble with this, you probably also have to have the strategy in terms of identifying the PHN decision makers and saying, right, we think you've got a lot of unmet demand in this particular sector. Are you aware of this service? And this is what we can do for you. But it's a lot of hard work. It's, there's not much low-hanging fruit, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. It would make things easier. Whether or not it would open the doors, I don't know. But anything that you can do to make it easier to health funds to do a deal, it's beneficial. And especially if your recommended fees are, I don't know, 10, 15% lower than the AMA recommended fees for those procedures. I'm sure it will make things easier. I think that's. I think that's the other advantage. I mean, because you're a small group, it's should be much easier to organize yourself in a very large group. I mean, you know the famous saying about trying to organize doctors, it's like trying to herd cats. Now, maybe you aren't quite cats, maybe you're dogs, I don't know, or maybe that's not the right word, maybe you're rabbits, and you've got to try. But it must be easier to organize yourself in a very large group, I would imagine. Yeah.
I'm just interested in your opinion on media, and obviously there's clear discrimination of whether there's a place or a timing where we'll want to program on people with no evidence of not voting and have access to Medicare. We have all the evidence and don't have access to the funding. Do you think that will still happen?
Absolutely. If you can get a good story on any of the channels, aired at 7 o'clock on any day, it's gold. It's absolute gold. Yeah, I mean, if they're working with you, they're going to put a good story together because they want, that's why it's going to, and especially if it's anti-government, they'll do a good story with you. But I don't know, it's difficult, and yeah. No, it's absolute gold. I mean, if you can get a good newsworthy story on there, it's worth gold.
Do you think there's any probability of Medicare retracting the numbers?
No, absolutely not.
No. Well, we are winding back Medicare.
No. No. Yeah. Yeah. If any of you were in Rob's position and trying to run your practice and sort out all your issues in your business and trying to take this on a voluntary part-time basis, it's tough. And if you've got somebody even on a part-time basis initially, that's probably what it'd be, who can sort of give it the time and energy it needs, it's worthwhile doing it. And you need to find somebody who's obviously got the skill and expertise, and so you've got to get the right person in. And also having a paid president or something like that might be a bridge too far for you guys, but there might be some pretty well-connected retired surgical podiatrists out there who might be prepared to step into that role and get paid a modest honorarium.